Ever wondered where you come from? Who are your ancestors? Imagine that one day, your curiosity gets too much. You decide it's time to invest in a DNA test. And after swabbing the inside of your cheek, you send that kit back to the company and prepare to find out a little more about your family roots. Maybe you've got a war hero in your bloodline, or an award-winning scientist, or a selfless humanitarian who advances the interest of humankind. You might even get lucky and find out the identity of your long-lost father. When the results come in, you see a name you don't recognize, a German name. You had no idea that your father came from Germany. Quickly, you head off to Google to cross-reference his name and find out if he ever did anything worth documenting. A short Google later, your jaw drops. You see the horrible and unmistakable words under his name on the Google panel: Concentration Camp Commandant. What would you do if you found out your father was Adolf Hitler's second in command? Would you try to make up for his crimes, change your name, and never speak of it again? These are the questions that the children of Nazi leaders had to contend with after the end of the war and the fall of the Third Reich. Some of them tried to rebuild what their parents broke. Others defended them until the bitter end. Today, we're taking a look at what exactly happened to the children of some of the most infamous Nazi leaders. The children of the fallen Nazi leadership ended up in a wide variety of places after the war. Some, however, never got to see it to the end. This brings us to the children of Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels and his wife, Magda Goebbels. Together, Magda and Joseph had 6 children, and Magda had one other son from a previous marriage. This eldest son, Harold Quandt, would be the only one of Magda's children to survive to the end of World War II. The other 6, 12-year-old Helga Suzanne, 11-year-old Hildegard Trondl, 9-year-old Helmut Christian, 8-year-old Hultine Catherine, 6-year-old Hedwig Johanna, and 4-year-old Hedrun Elizabeth, would not make it out alive. It was January of 1945 and the Red Army was closing in around the Nazi forces in Berlin. As the threat grew closer, Goebbels moved his family from their Lanka estate to Schwanenwerder. They remained there until April 22, 1945, when the Red Army crossed the border into Berlin. At this point, the Goebbels family moved again, retreating into the Führer bunker under the Reich Chancellery Garden. In the face of potential Soviet capture, many hiding out in the bunker began to discuss the possibility of dying by suicide rather than facing whatever punishment the enemy forces had in mind for them. Several people, including Karl Gebhardt and Albert Speer, offered to take the Goebbels children out of Berlin with them to ensure their safety, but Magda refused to allow it. Joseph Goebbels refused to leave Berlin, writing that reasons of humanity and personal loyalty required him to stay where he was. He would die there in the bunker, alongside Hitler. What happened next varies from witness to witness, but what we do know paints a grim picture. Rochus Misch, the bunker's telephone and radio operator, was one of the last people to see the children alive. He saw them sitting around a table in his work area, wearing their nightgowns as Magda combed their hair. Helga was crying softly as bedtime approached. As Magda took the children upstairs, he felt that something terrible was about to happen, but still, he did not intervene. Misch was correct. Something terrible did happen. According to Dr. Helmut Kuntz, an SS dentist, Magda Goebbels approached him toward the end of April, asking for help killing her children. He refused at first, insisting that the fate of her children was not his responsibility. However, she refused to let the issue drop and later told him that it was now a direct order from Hitler rather than a plea from help. On the evening of May 1st, the time had finally come. Magda gathered the children together in one room and told them that the doctor was there to give them an injection and that there was no reason to be afraid because all children and soldiers got this type of injection. One by one, Kuntz injected each of the children with morphine. He started with the eldest daughters, then the son, and then finished with the youngest. The entire process took about 10 minutes. Once the children were unconscious, Kuntz later testified that Magda entered the room with cyanide capsules in her hands. After a few minutes had passed, she told the doctor that she could not do it and insisted that he do it instead. He refused, and she replied, "Well, if you cannot do it, then get Stumpfegger." She was referring to Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, Adolf Hitler's personal surgeon. At first, he refused the horrific order as well, insisting that he was not there to kill other people's children. But after being threatened with Joseph Goebbels' wrath should he fail to comply, he entered the room with Magda Goebbels. A little while later, Magda left the room and told Kuntz that it was all over. The cyanide capsules had been crushed in the children's mouths and they were dead. Soon after, Magda and Joseph Goebbels followed them, taking their own lives. On May 3, 1945, Soviet troops discovered the 6 dead bodies of the Goebbels children in their bunker, still dressed in their pajamas, with ribbons in the girls' hair. Vice Admiral Hans Voss and radio broadcaster Hans Fritzsche were brought in to identify the bodies and positively identified them as the children of Magda and Joseph Goebbels. Their bodies were taken to the Bachau Cemetery in Berlin for an autopsy and investigation by Soviet doctors, and their cause of death was identified. Dr. Kuntz would later stand trial for his part in the children's deaths, and in January 1959 he was charged with 6 counts of aiding and abetting a homicide. The court proceedings were later stayed, citing the Impunity Act of 1954 as a justification. Kuntz died at the age of 66 on September 23, 1976, 9 years after Magda's only surviving child, Harold, was killed in a plane crash over Italy. And that was the end of the Goebbels family. Nazi leader Hermann Göring's only daughter, Edda, was baptized on November 4, 1938. At her christening, Adolf Hitler himself became her godfather. She grew up in Karenhall, the Göring country estate, where she was known as Kleine Prinzessin, or Little Princess. The Telegraph called her the Shirley Temple of Nazi Germany. As the Allied forces began to close in and the war drew to an end, Göring took Edda along with his wife Emmy to his mountain home at Oversalzberg. On May 21st, after the surrender of the Wehrmacht on May 8th, 6-year-old Edda and her mother were interned at the U.S. military-controlled Palace Hotel in Luxembourg. They were freed in 1946 and moved to a home near Nuremberg. When it was time for her father to stand trial at Nuremberg, Edda was granted permission to visit him in prison. He was sentenced to death for his crimes but refused to face his scheduled execution and swallowed a cyanide pill the night before. Edda was 8 years old when her father died. After his death, Edda and Emmy found themselves living in a cottage with no electricity or running water. They later moved to Munich, where Edda eventually attended and studied law. When it came to her father's role in the Third Reich, she largely kept it to herself, speaking of her father as a person more than anything else. In 1991, she spoke to journalist Gerald Posner for his book Hitler's Children, Sons and Daughters of Third Reich Leaders, and said, "I loved him very much, and it was obvious how much he loved me. My only memories of him are such loving ones, I cannot see him any other way." In 2015, she petitioned the Bavarian State Parliament for the return of property confiscated from her father's estate after the war. The request was denied unanimously after only a few minutes. She died in 2018 at the age of 80 and was reportedly buried in an unmarked grave. While Edda had fond memories of her father, other Nazi commanders' children never really knew them and had to learn about what their parents had done later in life. Monika Hertwig was the daughter of Eamon Goth, an SS officer who oversaw the operations at a concentration camp in Ploshov, Poland. He's perhaps best known as the villain of the Holocaust film Schindler's List. When he was executed for his crimes, Monika was only 1 year old. As a child, Monika's mother told her that her father was a good man at heart and that he had not meant to do anything wrong. But in 1993, when Monika saw Schindler's List in theaters, the reality of what her father had done hit her like a freight train. The realization made her sick. Monika set out to address her father's crimes through her work, including a 2008 documentary titled Inheritance. In the film, she reached out to Helen Jonas, a woman who had been taken from a concentration camp at the age of 15 and made to work in the Goth house. In the film, Monika says, "For Helen, it's time to bring closure, but it was not closure for me. I think it was the beginning of another life, a life where I'm able to live the truth." Monika Hertwig is currently still alive at the age of 78 years. Nicholas Frank was born on March 9, 1938 to his mother Bridget Herbst and his father Hans Frank. When Nicholas was 8 months old, his father was appointed governor of German-occupied Poland. There, Frank was responsible for many human rights abuses, including the murders of the Jewish population of Poland. The amount of death and destruction he was responsible for earned him the nickname the Butcher of Poland. Nicholas did not witness much of this personally, as he was only 7 years old when his father was sentenced to death at Nuremberg. But as an adult, after the death of his mother in 1959, Nicholas went into the field of journalism. He worked for German Playboy and at the Weekly Stern. The more he learned about his father and the older he got, the more he developed what he called a burning, obsessive hatred of the man. In 1987, he published a book about his father, Der Vater, eine Abrechnung, The Father, A Settling of Accounts, later published in English in 1991 as In the Shadow of the Reich. In 1995, his play Der Vater, or The Father, premiered, a depiction of a fictionalized version of himself exhuming his father's corpse and asking him to answer for his sins. He did not stop at writing about his father. In 2005, he wrote My German Mother about his mother and brother Norman about his eldest brother in 2013. In November 2020, Nicholas spoke to Mia Swart of Al Jazeera about his father and growing up in occupied Poland. I had known that we were privileged, that we were not normal people, but the war was not that real to me. I recall one time when I was 4 or 5, sitting in my father's black Mercedes and seeing a German tank that had been burned. Our chauffeur said, "Oh, that's a Tiger tank," and I was thrilled, but I never experienced any bad things, any war things. There was only one time toward the end of the war when we were sitting at Schliersee and I saw an armada of planes on their way to bomb Munich. Now, with all the knowledge he's accumulated over the years, Nicholas reflects on his father's death. I oppose capital punishment, but I am happy that my father got to experience the fear of death that he had inflicted upon so many innocent people. Albert Speer was a German architect and close confidant of Hitler who served as the Minister of Armaments and War Production in Nazi Germany throughout most of the war. During his time with the party, he also oversaw the Central Department for Resettlement, which evicted Jewish residents from their homes in Berlin. His son, Albert Speer Jr., was born on July 29, 1934. Like his father, he pursued a career in architecture with a focus on urban planning. In 1977, he became a professor of urban planning at the University of Kaiserslautern in Rhineland-Palatinate. He designed the Shanghai International Automobile City and was the Beijing Olympics lead designer. He spoke of his father infrequently and not especially fondly. According to his obituary in the New York Times, he deliberately distanced himself from his father throughout his life. His decision to become an architect was his own and had nothing to do with his father, according to him. He did not hate his father, but did describe him as not the kind of father who went over your homework. Albert Speer Jr. died on September 15, 2017, at the age of 83. One of the most infamous Nazi leaders of all time was Heinrich Himmler, one of Hitler's most devoted followers and a driving force behind the Holocaust. He and his wife had only one biological child, a daughter named Gudrun. When Gudrun was born in 1929, her father was the head of the SS. As Gudrun grew up, she experienced life as the daughter of Hitler's second-in-command, attending Christmas parties with Hitler and receiving gifts from him. At age 12, Gudrun and her father traveled to a concentration camp together. She wrote about the experience in her diary. "Today we went to the SS concentration camp at Dachau. We saw everything we could. We saw the gardening work, we saw the pear trees, we saw all the pictures painted by the prisoners, marvelous. And afterwards, we had a lot to eat. It was very nice." Over the years, her diary captured her feelings and views on the Third Reich and Germany. She wrote on March 5, 1945, "We no longer have any allies in Europe and can only rely on ourselves. The Luftwaffe is still so bad. Göring does not seem to care about anything. That windbag. Goebbels is doing a lot, but he always shows off. They all get medals and awards except Poppy, and he should be the first to get one." Poppy, of course, referred to her father, Heinrich Himmler. On April 19th, as Hitler retreated to his bunker, she wrote, "Daddy and all the others are up there and remain for the moment now that the great battle in the East has begun. Daddy has found it terribly difficult with the incredible amount of work. The Führer will not believe that the soldiers will no longer fight. Still, perhaps everything will turn out fine." In May of 1945, 15-year-old Gudrun and her mother left Germany for northern Italy and were arrested by American troops there. Meanwhile, her father had fled Germany after Hitler's death, shaved his mustache, put on an eye patch, and hid his identity. It didn't work, and he was captured by Soviet forces on May 20th, killing himself with a smuggled cyanide capsule 3 days later. While Gudrun and her mother were held in detention camps throughout Italy, she went on a hunger strike. After 4 years in detention camps, Gudrun and her mother were released and settled in Bielefeld in northern Germany. Gudrun sought work as a seamstress and a bookbinder, but struggled to get jobs with her infamous last name and ties to the Nazi regime. She used an assumed name to take a secretary job at the German Foreign Intelligence Service from 1961 to 1963 until her true identity was discovered and she was dismissed. In the late 1960s, she married a writer named Wolf-Dieter Berwitz, who became an official of the NPD, the right-wing National Democratic Party of Germany. The two moved into a home in the suburbs and had 2 children. Now, you might be wondering how exactly Gudrun reckoned with her father's legacy in the aftermath of World War II. The answer is she carried it on as best she could and never expressed shame. She would wear a silver brooch that he had given her, made up of 4 horse heads shaped like a swastika. She was an active member of an insular group called Stille Hilfe, or Silent Help, which helped former Nazis escape prosecution after the war, primarily by fleeing to South America. Through her work with the organization, she's reported to have aided Nazi war criminals such as Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Leon, and Anton Maleth, who was an SS guard convicted of killing prisoners at the Theresienstadt concentration camp. When he was sentenced to death in absentia by a Czech court, Gudrun helped make arrangements for him to stay in a retirement home outside of Munich on land that had once belonged to Nazi official Rudolf Hess. He lived there until 2001. As for Gudrun herself, she died unrepentant in 2018 at the age of 88. Rudolf Hess was a prominent member of the Nazi Party who held the position of Deputy Führer to Adolf Hitler from 1933 to 1941. His only son, Wolf Rüdiger Hess, was born in Munich on November 18, 1937. He lived with his parents until May of 1941, when Rudolf Hess flew solo to Scotland in an attempt to arrange peace talks with the Duke of Hamilton. Hess was immediately arrested there, and the Nazi government officially denounced him, saying that he had a mental illness. So Wolf's mother Ilse took Wolf to the family's country home at Bad Oberdorf. On June 3, 1947, Wolf's mother was arrested and interned at Augsburg-Guggenheim camp. He lived with his aunt until his mother's release in March 1948. He became an architect in 1961, but architecture was not his only passion. Wolf was fixated on his father's death, which had been an alleged suicide at Spandau prison in Berlin. Wolf believed that the British Secret Intelligence Service was responsible for his father's death. He wrote 3 books on the subject of his father: My Father, Rudolf Hess, Who Murdered My Father, Rudolf Hess, and Rudolf Hess, I Regret Nothing. Wolf Rüdiger Hess suffered a stroke on October 24, 2001, and died at the age of 63. At the age of 15, a boy named Rainier Huss was on a school trip to Dachau concentration camp when he recognized his last name on an informational placard. Rudolf Huss, not to be confused with Rudolf Hess, was the commandant of the Auschwitz death camp for 5 years and was also his grandfather. After discovering the truth and facing his family's denial of that truth, he left home and cut them off. He then began a career of speaking about his family's dark past and confronting the horrors of the Holocaust, as well as attempting to help return stolen possessions to the descendants of the Holocaust survivors they were taken from. The story of Rainier Huss would have ended there, but in August 2020 he was faced with accusations of fraud. He was found guilty of defrauding a businessman, taking money that he claimed was going to be used to finish a film about the Holocaust. However, there was no film, just 200,000 euros in personal debt. According to the Irish Times, he faced 18 convictions in 20 years, and 15 of those were for fraud. These fraud accusations and convictions have called into question Huss's motivations for discussing his grandfather's crimes and whether or not he's simply cashing in on his family's terrible legacy. Martin Bormann was the head of the Nazi Party Chancellery and private secretary to Adolf Hitler. He had 10 children, but his first and eldest, Martin Bormann Jr., was named after him. Like Etta Göring, Bormann was baptized with Adolf Hitler as his godfather. He was a dedicated young Nazi who was nicknamed Kronzi, short for Kronprinz or Crown Prince. He attended the Nazi Party Academy of Matrei am Brenner from 1940 until the school's closure on April 15, 1945. On May 1st, Bormann's father died, along with Dr. Stumpfegger, the one who helped kill the Goebbels children. In 1946, his mother died in the prison hospital at Merano. After his mother's death, Martin was taken into the care of the Church of Maria Krichtal and converted to Catholicism. He became an altar boy at the church, where he was arrested by American intelligence officers and taken in for questioning. After his release, he returned to the church. Martin was ordained a Catholic priest on July 26, 1958. He worked as a missionary in the Congo from 1961 to 1964. In the early 70s, he left the priesthood and married a former nun after the two renounced their vows. In 2000, Martin spoke to Spectator UK about his father, saying, "I love him as my father, and I hope that I can meet him as a redeemed, saved man. But I cannot acquit him of any of the guilt that he brought upon himself in his political life by following Adolf Hitler. I can't do that." In 2011, a troubling story came out regarding Bormann's time teaching at Salzburg Monastery boarding school when he was 30 years old. According to a man known as Victor M., who reached out to the newspapers with the story, Bormann molested him while he was a student and told him that no one would believe him if he reported it. 3 other students claimed that Bormann was physically abusive during his time as a teacher there. Victor M. demanded an apology, but Bormann told Austrian magazine Profil that he did not remember Victor. The case was never officially resolved, and Bormann died in 2013. One of the most notable descendants of Nazi leadership is not the child of one of the leaders, but rather the granddaughter of his brother. Kathrin Himmler is the granddaughter of Ernst Himmler, Heinrich Himmler's younger brother. Rather than run from the ghosts of her family's past, she confronted them head-on and researched the Himmler family for her book, The Himmler Brothers, A German Family History. The book traced the lives of Ernst, Heinrich, and their third brother, Gebhard. As she delved deeper into the family's history, there were times when the task became almost too much to bear. In an interview with The List, she said, "Many times during my research, it was quite difficult for me to go on. As things were revealed, they became more and more shocking. We descendants were left with no doubt about what Heinrich had done, but his actions cast a large shadow that the rest of the family were standing in, many hiding there." Though Heinrich Himmler is the most infamous of the brothers, Katrin discovered her grandfather was responsible for plenty of his own horrific deeds. During her research, she learned that her grandfather had been directly responsible for the deportation and later death of Major Schmidt, a Jewish engineer. The man had been protected due to his expertise, but after Ernst wrote him off and dismissed him as unuseful, the man was reclassified and sent to die in a labor camp. In 2011, she appeared in the documentary Hitler's Children, which covered the lives of several descendants of prominent Nazi leaders. Following the documentary, she gave an interview to Time where she spoke openly about her relationship to her name. She once planned to change her name from Himmler, but kept it after deciding that changing the name would be another way to hide from the truth of her family's lineage. During the interview, journalist Belinda Luscombe brought up the tendency of many descendants of Nazi leaders to avoid having children, deciding to end the family line. Katrin explained that this was not her personal decision. Other children of perpetrators in Germany have decided to do that, but for me, that's a continuity of how the Nazis thought, that bloodlines define everything. Genes aren't everything. You can always make your own decisions. For me, it was important to pass on what I learned. Today, Katrin has a son with her ex-husband, whose family escaped the Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust. Now check out what they didn't tell you about concentration camps, or watch this instead.